It was quiet. Too quiet. December 21st. Just 4 days before Christmas. A time when most families are wrapping gifts, lighting fireplaces, waiting for the joy of children's laughter. But on one dead-end street in California City, no laughter came. No toys scattered in the yard. No small voices calling out for snow or cocoa or comfort. Just silence. The house looked ordinary enough. Beige walls. A worn wooden fence. 2 cars in the driveway. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. But something was very wrong. The call came in just after sunset. A father said his children, 2 little boys, had disappeared, vanished from the backyard. No one saw them walk away. No one heard a gate creak open. No one saw shadows slipping past the edge of the property. The parents said they looked for them. They said they searched the yard, the street, the house. They said they couldn't find them anywhere. But what the police found, or rather, what they didn't find, raised more questions than answers. No footprints in the dirt. No handprints on the gate. No tiny shoes left behind in the rush. Not a single piece of evidence that 2 toddlers had been there at all. They brought in dogs, drones, thermal scanners. They searched the nearby fields, endless, flat stretches of desert. Nothing, not even a thread from a jacket or a wrapper from a snack. Search teams came. Search teams left. But the boys never came back. Their names were Orrin and Orson West. But those weren't the names they were born with. They entered this world as classic and Pettis. Bright-eyed, innocent, quiet. They were just 3 and 4 years old. Too young to know what fear is. Too small to protect themselves. And as the hours turned into days, and the days into weeks, a new question began to emerge. Not where the boys had gone, but when they had gone missing, because something didn't fit. Neighbors didn't remember seeing them. Not that day. Not the week before. Not ever. No playtime in the driveway. No tricycles. No bikes. Not a single sound of childhood echoing across that yard. And then came the headlines. 2 brothers vanished without a trace. Adoptive parents plead for help. The search for Orrin and Orson. The images flash across screens. 2 small faces framed in innocent smiles. Their eyes wide, unaware of the storm surrounding them. But behind the cameras, behind the microphones, behind polite interviews and rehearsed pleas, something else was unfolding. The timeline didn't make sense. The story didn't hold up. And the truth, if there ever was one, was slipping further out of reach. Months would pass before the real horror came to light. Months before investigators would reveal that the boys may not have disappeared in December at all. In fact, they might not have disappeared. They might have never been there. 2 children, 2 stories, 2 names now carved into a mystery that refuses to rest. They were only 3 and 4 years old. But by the time anyone started looking, it was already too late. California City is small. A quiet desert town marked by long stretches of flat land, wide roads, and empty silence. There are no tall buildings here. No flashing signs. Just rows of modest homes. Fences leaning slightly in the wind, and a sun that sets hard and fast. On December 21st, 2020, at 5:53 p.m., a 911 call was placed from one of those homes. A man said his 2 sons, aged 3 and 4, were missing. He said they'd been outside, playing in the backyard while he gathered wood. He said he looked up, and they were gone. He said he searched the area, and then called the police. That man was Trezo West, the boy's adoptive father. Officers arrived minutes later. Flashlights scanned the yard. 9 units were deployed. Drones were launched over the vast desert fields. The backyard was fenced in. A gate on the west side opened to an alleyway that led into nothing but dry brush and dirt. But there were no tracks, no broken twigs, no disturbed soil. And most chilling of all, the dogs detected no scent trail beyond the property. It was as if the boys had never been there. Officers knocked on neighbors' doors. They asked if anyone had seen the children earlier that day or the day before. No one had. Not that week. Not in recent memory. Some neighbors said they didn't even know children lived at the house. The Wests had moved to California City from Bakersfield only a few months earlier. A fresh start, perhaps, or something else. That night, body cams recorded Trezor retracing his steps, showing where he claimed he walked, describing the moments when he realized the boys were gone. His tone was calm, controlled, but questions soon followed. Why would two toddlers disappear together so suddenly? Why didn't the parents notice right away? Why didn't they search the neighborhood before calling 911? In the footage, Jacqueline West, quiet, withdrawn, stayed mostly inside the house. She didn't join the street search. She didn't ask where the boys might have gone. She didn't cry. Neither of them did. The police noticed, and so did the public. By the next, the story had already begun to spread online. Missing boys, young, black, adopted, gone without a trace. The words hit differently. This wasn't a child wandering into the woods or a teen running away from home. These were two toddlers, just 3 and 4 years old. No jackets, no shoes. No one saw them leave, and no one could say when they were last seen, aside from the parents. And even that was beginning to unravel. Police began canvassing surveillance footage, houses, street corners, businesses. But there were no recordings of the boys walking the neighborhood. No passing cars slow to pick them up. No cries for help. The home security footage provided by the Wests raised eyebrows. Investigators noticed gaps. The footage never showed the boys in the backyard. In fact, the last time the boys were verifiably seen by anyone outside the home was months earlier. That detail would send the entire investigation down a darker road. At first, authorities treated the case like a missing persons incident. Flyers were made. News outlets covered the disappearance. Volunteers joined searches in the surrounding areas. But as days passed, the narrative started to shift. Because no matter how far they looked, how many acres they scanned, how many hours they searched, nothing pointed away from a house. Everything pointed back in. Investigators returned with search warrants. They scanned the house for DNA, for traces of the boys, for signs of a struggle, for signs of neglect. They searched under floorboards. They examined drain pipes. They questioned every word the parents had spoken. And soon, they began piecing together a timeline that contradicted what the Wests had told them, a timeline that raised a disturbing possibility. The boys didn't vanish that night. They may have been missing long before the world even realized they were gone. And if that was true, then the call to police wasn't the beginning of the mystery. It was the cover for something that had already happened. December 21st, 2020, a Monday evening in California City. The streets were quiet. The temperature had dipped into the low 40s. Most residents were indoors, winding down for the night. On Aspen Avenue, a modest single-story home sat under a pale orange sky. Inside were Trezor and Jacqueline West, the adoptive parents of 6 children. For biological, 2 adopted. According to them, the 2 youngest, Orrin and Orson, were playing in the backyard. It was just before 6 p.m. when, as Trezor would later tell police, he stepped out to gather firewood. He claimed he kept an eye on the boys while walking to the side of the house. It only took a few minutes, but when he returned, they were gone, vanished. He said he checked the yard. He said he called their names. He said Jacqueline joined the search. Then, after several minutes, he said they called 911. The police dispatcher picked up the call at 5:53 p.m. On the recording, Trezor's voice is calm. Too calm, some would later say. He explains the boys are missing. He explains they may have walked out the gate. He explains they've looked everywhere. But what he didn't say raised eyebrows. There was no panic in his tone, no urgency in his pacing. And as officers arrived on the scene minutes later, something struck them immediately. The backyard, where the boys were last seen, was undisturbed. No signs of a struggle. No small footprints leading into the alley. No drag toys. No drop mittens. And the gate, the one the boys supposedly exited through, had no fingerprints. No clues. Just an empty patch of dirt behind a chain-link fence. The search began fast. Officers fanned out across the neighborhood. They knocked on doors. They canvassed streets and alleyways. 9 units were brought in. Drones were launched overhead. For hours, the silence was broken only by the sound of crunching boots, sweeping flashlights, and shortwave radios crackling in the cold. But nothing turned up. Not a footprint. Not a scrap of clothing. Not a single trace of where the boys had gone. And then the questions began. Investigators started asking neighbors, "Had you seen the boys that day? Had you ever seen them at all?" One by one, residents shook their heads. No, they hadn't seen Orrin and Orson playing outside. Not that evening. Not the day before. Some said they didn't even know children were living in that house. These were not occasional neighbors. They were people who passed that house daily. People who watched children ride bikes, walk dogs, take out the trash. And yet no one had seen the 2 youngest boys. Not recently. The Wests claimed they moved to California City a few months earlier. A new chapter. A fresh beginning. But in a town this small, children are noticed. And the fact that no one could remember seeing the boys was a detail that hit investigators like cold water. Still, the search continued into the night. Flashlights lit the desert brush. Patrol cars circled block after block. Volunteers passed out flyers, calling the boys names. But there were no answers. By midnight, the ground had been walked over so many times. Any trace evidence was likely gone. And still nothing. No sign of where they'd gone. No security footage showing them walk down the street. No Ring camera clips. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. But something about the story didn't sit right. The timeline was clean. Too clean. The boys were last seen, then missing, then the call was made. There were no witnesses. No real-time panic. No earlier attempt to alert neighbors or flag down cars. And the gate? The one the boys supposedly exited through? It was closed when officers arrived. Neatly. Almost too neatly. As the hours passed and the temperature dropped, a new chill settled over the investigation. One not caused by the weather, but by the growing feeling that this wasn't just a case of 2 children who wandered off. There was something off about the story, and the timing, the calmness, the contradictions, the neighbors who had never seen the boys. It was too many unanswered questions, all within the span of a single evening. And then, just hours later, investigators would discover a chilling detail in the backyard. By the morning of December 22nd, the backyard had already become the center of a mystery that refused to make sense. It was a place where Orrin and Orson West were last seen. And yet, there was no sign they had ever been there. Police dogs were brought in. Trained 9 units, capable of picking up the scent of a child from a sock, a blanket, a toy. They sniffed the yard, the fence, the alley behind the house. But they stopped just feet from where they started. The dogs detected no trail, no lingering scent, no path leading away from the yard to a road, to another house. There were also no footprints in the dirt, no scuff marks, no dragging, no overturned gravel, nothing. The only thing that surrounded the home was silence. By now, the search had expanded beyond the immediate area. Dozens of officers combed the open desert surrounding California City. Helicopters hovered overhead. Thermal drones swept across the cold, cracked soil. Hours turned to days. The West family appeared in front of cameras, offering statements. Trezell described how the boys disappeared. He repeated his version of events. He insisted he had only turned his back for a moment. Jacqueline stood quietly by his side, her face unreadable, her hands tightly folded. She didn't speak, not at the first press conference, not at the second. The police issued public pleas for help. Flyers went up across the city. Media coverage spread. And online, something else began to unfold. Social media erupted with questions. Who were the Wests? Why had they moved from Bakersfield to California City? Why had no one seen the boys playing in the neighborhood? Why was there so little emotion in their interviews? Posts went viral. Threads exploded with speculation. Amateur sleuths began analyzing video footage, voice tones, body language. Some claimed Trezell's story didn't hold up. Others noticed inconsistencies in the timeline. And beneath all the theories and hashtags, one chilling question began surfacing over and over again. Were Orrin and Orson ever at that house at all? That question wasn't just whispered online. It was now being asked by police. Law enforcement returned to property with search warrants. They scoured the house inside and out. Forensics teams examined carpets, drains, trash bins. They analyzed the walls for trace blood. They opened crawl spaces. A second search warrant came days later. Still, nothing conclusive. No signs of the boys. No fingerprints matching them in key areas. No recent toys. No well-worn shoes. Meanwhile, the biological family began speaking out. Their voices trembled with pain, but not surprise. Ryan Dean, the boy's birth mother, gave interviews through tears. She said something wasn't right. She said she tried for months to see her sons, but had been shut out. They didn't let me talk to them, she told reporters. They didn't want me to see them, and I knew something was wrong. I felt it, she told reporters. Other family members expressed outrage. They didn't believe the Wests. They didn't believe the boys could have just vanished. They wanted answers, fast, but the investigation was already revealing something few had expected. There were no independent sightings of the boys in California City. No neighbors had seen them. No photos, no videos. There were no doctor's visits, no daycare records, no school reports. Even the West's own children, when questioned, gave inconsistent accounts of the last time they had seen their younger brothers. It was a vacuum of proof, as if the boys had never truly arrived. And yet the West insisted they had. They held to their story. They made statements, but they didn't cry. And when the public watched those interviews, when they replayed the footage again and again, something felt off. Tension grew across California City. Candlelight vigils were held. Posters lined storefront windows. But hope was dimming, because people began to wonder, did the boys even make it to this house? As the investigation entered its second week, something began to shift. The urgency of the search never faded, but the focus began to narrow. Police weren't just looking for missing boys anymore. They were reconstructing a timeline, and what they found was a timeline that didn't hold. According to Trey Zell and Jacqueline West, Orrin and Orson were last seen at their home in California City on the evening of December 21st, 2020. That was the official story. That was the foundation of the entire case. But there was no photo of the boys that day. No neighbor had heard them laugh or cry or call out. No teacher had marked their absence. No store security camera had caught them on the way to or from town. No one, outside of the West household, could confirm they were ever there. Investigators dug into records, health reports, child welfare case notes. They checked dates. They reviewed the last time the boys had been seen by a doctor. It was months earlier. They requested school attendance logs. The boys were not enrolled. There were no play dates, no birthday parties, no recent medical visits. It was as if they had slowly, quietly vanished long before the world ever knew they were missing. And the more the police pressed, the more inconsistencies surfaced. One of the other children, an older sibling, gave a different account of the last time he saw his brothers. It wasn't in December. It was much earlier in the year. His words were vague. His tone was uncertain. But in that moment, a chilling possibility emerged. The boys may have been gone for weeks, maybe even months. Before anyone made a single phone call, theories started to swirl. Online, speculation turned to obsession. Some claimed the Wests had harmed the boys themselves. Others wondered if the children had died accidentally, perhaps from neglect or abuse, and the disappearance had been staged. A few held on to hope that maybe the boys had been secretly given to someone else, hidden away, trafficked, but the evidence or lack of it kept circling back to the same place. The last known people to have custody of the boys were Trey Zell and Jacqueline West, and no one else could place them after September 2020. Cell phone records were pulled. Surveillance footage from their previous home in Bakersfield was reviewed. Questions were asked about the family's sudden move to California City. Why this town? Why so remote? And why had no one, no doctor, no caseworker, no friend, seen the boys since they left Bakersfield? Law enforcement tightened its net. A large dig site was established near their previous address. Backyards were excavated. Cadaver dogs were deployed. The FBI joined the case. And yet, still no bodies, no physical proof, no confession. But behind the scenes, detectives were growing more certain. The case was no longer just about what happened on December 21st. It was about what happened before, weeks before, possibly even longer. And as all of this unraveled, the community's patience began to fray. Protesters stood outside the West family's house. Some shouted, some prayed, some held signs with a simple, painful question. Where are the boys? The Wests moved out of California City not long after. They said it was for their safety. Others believed it was something else, something far more calculated. The house they left behind stood quiet, a shell of a story full of gaps, a location with no proof, and the question that now haunted both police and public alike. Had Orrin and Orson ever made it to California City at all? As days turned to weeks, the search for Orrin and Orson West remained fruitless. But something else began to grow in its place. Not answers, but suspicion. The press conference footage was being dissected frame by frame. Trezell stood before the camera, arms crossed tightly, swaying slightly from foot to foot. He repeated his account of that evening. He emphasized how quickly the boys had disappeared. Jacqueline stood beside him, silent, avoiding the lens, her eyes locked forward, her face expressionless. And the public noticed. Comments flooded in. Why isn't she crying? Why do they seem so composed? Where's the panic? On Facebook, on Twitter, on local news broadcasts, the couple's behavior was no longer just strange. To many, it was evidence of guilt, of coldness, or of something far worse. Internet sleuths began posting side-by-side videos of their interviews. In one, Trezell fumbles a sentence. In another, Jacqueline visibly flinches when the boys' names are mentioned. Armchair psychologists, crime vloggers, and retired detectives all weighed in. And while public analysis intensified, something else was quietly unraveling behind closed doors. The boys' biological mother, Ryan Dean, stepped forward. Through tears, she spoke to local stations. She revealed that she hadn't even been told her sons were missing until hours after the public was. She hadn't received a direct call. She hadn't spoken to the adoptive parents. She had seen it on the news. They didn't even call me, she said, voice shaking. They didn't even try to let me know. Those are my babies. Her voice broke through the noise, and with it came outrage. Vigils were held across Bakersfield. People lit candles, held signs, chanted the boys' names. The hashtag Where Are the Boys surged across social media. Videos speculating on the parents' timeline gained tens of thousands of views. Side-by-side comparison maps appeared online, suggesting the boys may have never even lived in California City. The public wanted to believe the boys had wandered off, that they'd be found, that there was still hope. But the facts no longer fit that theory. And then, a neighbor came forward. She didn't ask for attention. She didn't go to reporters. She went to police. Quietly, she said she had been reviewing her home surveillance footage. She lived just a few doors down. Her camera pointed toward the west driveway and street. She checked the footage for the day of December 21st. She watched for any sign of children playing outside, and she saw none. But then she looked further back. Days, weeks, no sign of the boys. Not once. She told officers that in all the time the West had lived there, she had never, not once, seen Orrin or Orson outside, not in the yard, not on the porch, not getting into the car. And in a neighborhood where children are almost always seen, always heard, that absence spoke volumes. Theories now hardened into accusations. The public, once hopeful, now feared the truth was much darker. And in living rooms across the country, one question began to echo louder than ever before. Did the boys even make it to California City? The family insisted yes. But more and more people believed otherwise, because now There was more than just a missing persons case. There was a timeline with no witnesses. There was surveillance with no footage. There was a mother who never got a phone call. And there was a tip from a quiet neighbor that would challenge everything the parents had said. As 2021 began, something had changed. The billboards, the flyers, the tearful pleas, they hadn't brought the boys home. But investigators were no longer searching in the desert. They were looking behind closed doors. And every path led back to one place. One house. Two names. Trey Zell and Jacqueline West. To the world, they were adoptive parents of 6. Quiet, private, church-going. But to investigators, that image was cracking. Records showed the Wests had moved to California City just months before the boys disappeared. Their former home was in Bakersfield, and there, the paper trail was longer. Interviews began. Caseworkers, neighbors, former landlords, past reports with Child Protective Services were reviewed. There were no criminal charges, but there were flags, complaints, investigations, disciplinary notes. Nothing that stuck, nothing that removed children, but enough to raise concern, enough to paint a picture. The Wests had adopted Orrin and Orson after fostering them. It was supposed to be permanent, a new life, but the cracks in that story had already begun long before the boys vanished. Then came the interviews. Trey Zell, under formal questioning, repeated what he'd said to the press. But when pressed on details, his timeline faltered. The minutes, the phone call, the backyard. Jacqueline, meanwhile, gave an entirely different version of events. She said she hadn't seen the boys for a little while before that evening. She couldn't remember the exact time. She couldn't remember the exact last moment they were in her sight. And then came the footage. Video from Bakersfield. Neighbors who hadn't seen the boys in weeks. The Wests said they were overwhelmed, that they were being judged unfairly. But behind closed doors, investigators were no longer debating whether Orrin and Orson were kidnapped. They were building a case with no bodies, no confessions, but a case nonetheless. For the first time, authorities said it out loud. They no longer believed the boys were alive. The investigation had turned criminal. The public didn't know it yet, but charges were coming. 2 names, 2 different stories, and a house full of questions that no longer had time to wait for answers. Weeks turned into months. The house had been searched, the electronics seized, the dogs brought in, but still, no sign of Orrin, no sign of Orson. What had once been a breaking news headline had started to fade from the ticker tape. California City was quiet again. Bakersfield moved on with its days, but in the homes of 2 families, time had stopped. The case went cold. No charges, no new witnesses, no remains. The adoptive parents, Trey, Zell, and Jacqueline, said nothing. They gave no new interviews. They made no new statements. They had moved out of their California City home. No one had seen them since. Candlelight vigils continued. Photos of 2 smiling little boys, Classic and Sintra, were taped to poles, held up at street corners. The reward money began to grow. $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. Local businesses pledged funds. Celebrities shared the missing poster. But leads? None. The biological family held press conferences. One by one, they came forward. Mothers, aunts, cousins, faces heavy, voices hoarse. They're not just names, one family member said. They're not just a headline. These were real little boys. Ryan Dean, the boy's biological mother, could barely finish her sentence. "I just want to know where they are," she whispered. "I just want to bury my sons, if that's what it is. Just bring them home." But there was no homecoming. As spring passed into summer, the case sat in silence. Detectives still worked it, but the tone had changed. Once a race against time, it was now a question of evidence. And without bodies, without a confession, the case had stalled. Behind closed doors, the investigation continued. Quietly, methodically, but outside those doors, all the public could hear. was silence. The kind of silence that isn't just quiet, it's unbearable. A mother waiting at a porch light. A neighborhood no longer asking questions. Two names fading from headlines. And a fear that what happened might never be fully known. As months passed, hope turned into fear. And then, silence. For over a year, the case had sat in silence. No new evidence. No confessions. No sightings. But behind closed doors, prosecutors had been watching, building. And then, on a cold March morning in 2022, everything changed. News broke across Bakersfield. Trezell and Jacqueline West had been arrested. The adoptive parents, the same couple who stood before cameras pleading for help, were now facing 2 counts of second-degree murder. The press conference was swift. Kern County District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer stood behind a wooden podium. Her tone, steady. Her words, direct. "Our investigation has led to one conclusion," she said, "that Orrin and Orson West are deceased." The courtroom sketches showed the Wests in jumpsuits, stone-faced, eyes down, no tears, no visible reaction. The charges were staggering. 2 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of child cruelty, false reporting of an emergency. But what stunned the public most wasn't just the arrest. It was what prosecutors believed had actually happened. They claimed the boys had not vanished on December 21st. They claimed they had died 3 months earlier, in September. They reported the boys missing in December, the DA said. But the evidence suggests the boys were already gone well before that day. Court documents revealed a timeline full of contradictions. Phone records, statements, surveillance footage gaps. The Wests had, according to prosecutors, created an entire false narrative. One meant to buy time, one built on deception. The documents did not reveal how the boys died. There were no bodies, no confirmed cause of death, but the charges stood. A typewriter text overlay appears. Cause of death, unknown. Bodies, never recovered. It didn't matter. Prosecutors were confident enough to move forward. And the public? They were stunned. Some cried. Some cheered. But almost everyone asked the same question. If the boys were already gone in September, what happened in that house during those missing months? And where were their bodies now? It had taken 15 months. But now, the justice system was in motion. By late 2022, the headlines had shifted. What began as a desperate search for 2 missing toddlers had become one of California's most closely watched murder trials in years. Trezell and Jacqueline West, charged, indicted, and now awaiting trial, sat in silence behind defense tables. The courtroom was small, but the interest wasn't. Reporters filled benches. Protesters gathered outside with signs that read, "Justice for Orrin and Orson. Where are the boys?" The legal question at hand was one few courts dared to answer. How do you convict someone of murder when no body is ever found? The prosecution strategy relied on circumstantial evidence, and there was plenty of it. Cell phone data that placed the Wests in questionable locations, surveillance footage that contradicted their timeline, witness testimony from neighbors who never saw the boys after September, but no confession, no remains, no cause of death. The defense argued the case was built on public pressure, on outrage, not proof. They filed multiple motions to suppress evidence, questioned the reliability of the surveillance timestamps, suggested alternate explanations. Maybe the boys wandered off. Maybe someone else was involved. The judge reviewed every motion, every piece of digital evidence, every timeline discrepancy, and ruled the case would proceed. Outside the courthouse, tensions escalated. Protesters called for life sentences. Some wore T-shirts with the boys' faces. Others laid teddy bears at the courthouse steps. National media outlets began to follow the case. Cable networks, podcasts, YouTube channels, all covering a trial without a body, without a weapon, and without a final resting place. And yet, the jury listened, the public watched. And in courtroom after courtroom, question after question, the same chilling thought repeated itself. If these children are gone, why has no one come forward? Why hasn't anyone told the truth? The judge called for decorum, but outside, the crowd chanted louder. Justice for Classic. Justice for Sincera. Their birth names, spoken louder now than they ever had been in life. The trial was no longer just about evidence. It had become a question of belief. Could you find someone guilty of the worst possible crime with no physical trace left behind? The court had one answer. The public had another. And somewhere in the middle, two small boys remained missing and unaccounted for. The courtroom proceedings would stretch on. The evidence would be debated. The charges argued. But outside, something deeper had already begun. In the quiet corners of Bakersfield, in the streets of California City, the names Classic and Sincera returned. Not as headlines, not as hashtags, but as memorials, as murals, as the faces of two little boys who were failed, yet still fiercely remembered. The biological family, heartbroken but unrelenting, stood in front of microphones again. Cameras rolled. Reporters asked questions. But the family didn't speak in legal terms. They spoke as a mother, as a father, as an aunt. Ryan Dean, their biological mother, spoke through tears. I wake up every morning still hoping this isn't real. They were babies. They didn't deserve this. Candlelight vigils turned into something more. Muralists took to brick walls, painting wide eyes, gentle smiles, tiny hands. Communities gathered not to speculate, but to grieve, to remember. And across the country, people said their names out loud again. Classic, Sincera. Schools released balloons in silence. Church groups laid flowers beneath portraits. One mural in East Bakersfield simply read, "You were never missing to us." The tragedy had turned into a reminder of children lost in the system, a reminder of red flags ignored, and still no final resting place, still no goodbye. But now, across sidewalks and storefronts, in paintings and prayers, the boys had names again, and faces, not just two among thousands, but two that people wouldn't forget. Two tiny boys, forgotten by a system, but remembered by millions. They were just 3 and 4 years old. Two brothers, two lives, and somehow they vanished without a trace. The justice system may have moved forward. Arrests were made, charges filed, but even now, the truth remains incomplete. We still don't know how they died. We still don't know where they are. And the question remains, will we ever know what really happened to Orrin and Orson West? If this case shocked you, if it left you unsettled, if it made you feel like justice is still waiting, subscribe to this channel, because we cover the stories that don't get the answers they deserve, the stories that too often get forgotten. And drop a comment below. Do you believe justice has been served? Do you believe we'll ever find the truth? Do you think we'll ever find those two boys? Let us know what you think, because their names matter, their story matters, and your voice might just help keep the truth alive. The court moved forward. The headlines faded, but some questions were never answered. The bodies were never found. No grave, no remains, no final goodbye. No motive was ever confirmed. No confession was ever made. And to this day, no one knows where Orrin and Orson truly are. Two little boys, taken in, reported missing, presumed dead, but somewhere in the timeline, in the interviews, in the gaps, in the silence, lies were told, and the truth is still buried somewhere. Two brothers gone, two stories told, but somewhere between the statements, the silence, the timelines, is the truth. A truth that may never be fully known, unless someone finally talks, unless someone finally listens. What do you think happened? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, if you believe the names of the lost should never be erased, hit the subscribe button. We cover the cases the world tried to forget, the victims who never got justice, and the families still waiting for answers. Click subscribe now, because telling these stories is how we keep their names alive.